Good afternoon and welcome to 3 o'clock with SOC. Give me a second while I welcome our Spanish-speaking neighbors. Buenas tardes. Gracias por estar con nosotros hoy día a las 3 p.m. con SOC. Si quieren acceso al programa, por favor marquen el número que aparece en la pantalla, que es 425-436-6200. Cuando le contestan la llamada, por favor comparten el clave o el contraseña, que es 627-682. I'm glad you're with us this Monday. What's the date here? June 8th, 2020. We are really honored to be able to be with you every day. As you know, the quarantine is still phasing in. We're trying to all be safe, and SOC has found different ways and increased ways to connect with you because we can't connect with you quite yet in person. We look forward to when we can. My name is Tammy Rivera. I'm the Executive Director and the lead organizer for Southside Organizing Center. All of our staff is still available for you, and we've grown from a staff of 30 to about from a staff of 3 to a staff of 30 in a short amount of time. And so we are here for you. Please know that. You can call us at 414-672-8090. You can email us at soc@socmilwaukee.org. And you can visit our webpage at www.socmilwaukee.org, where we have a full page dedicated to information and resources and action you can take related to COVID-19 or the coronavirus. There are a couple of things I want to share with you that I think are important for you to know. One is we want you to be with us every day at 3. We try to bring you the people with the most expertise or most authority on some topics, including legacy civil rights leaders and academics and researchers, elected officials, people hired in administrative positions. And that gives you an original source of information to clarify any myths or misinformation or intentional wrong information that is being put out there. We have a whole team of folks working here, just so you know. Almost all of our staff have a role every afternoon related to the forum. And so please know there's a whole group of people making this happen. The other thing I want to share is tomorrow, Dr. Baez, a legacy civil rights leader, Latino rights leader, bilingual education leader, is going to be once again with us. If you recall, he was with us all the way from Puerto Rico on his first visit. And he's going to be talking about the civil rights movement and in particular protests. And then also, he happens to be the school board director for the Near South Side, and he'll be sharing his comments on some of the decisions MPS has made and their plans for moving forward. And then the Office of Violence Prevention, we're still getting them into the schedule. They have committed to being with us. Dr. Rob Smith, really a historian and professor at Marquette University and the director of the Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, has committed to being with us. All those schedules are being worked on. I also want to give you a heads up because you've said you wanted some things. Things are important to you and we're working on it. So we're putting, Marlene is putting together a whole day dedicated to staying healthy, especially mental health. And that'll be coming. We're doing a day on bilingual education, a day on special education, especially for our ALAS super viewers. And so please know that that's coming up. We want to share our solidarity with protesters. SOC is not trying to duplicate services that already exist. And so we're focusing our energies on this forum, and just so you know, and our work in the Collaborative Community Committee and our work reactivating the Near Southside Emergency Peace Team. We want to let you know that the Fire and Police Commission is requesting information from the community on the performance of our Chief of Police, Alfonso Morales. And they reappointed him and said it was conditional that they'll review him in 6 months, and it's the 6 months. And so they want to know from us, those residents of the city of Milwaukee, how he's doing, how we think we're being serviced by him. And so we've put together a survey that's coming out today that you'll be able to participate in if you're a Near Southside resident. And so I just want to emphasize, it's not that the rest of you, your opinion is not important to us, but because our mission is specific to a geographic area, we're taking in surveys from the district that we serve. And also, if you would like to give input and you live outside of our area, when we post these surveys, the link to the surveys, it'll have the Fire and Police Commission email so that you could directly give input to them if you're not from our district. Why is it important to get information, response from our district? Well, you know, we have had a very divided city, and there are all kinds of narratives. Narratives are stories people tell and believe. And so, reject. And so we want to make sure that the Southside response is being accurately depicted. And, you know, whether you agree or don't agree, it's really important to us that the residents' voice get heard. And so we're trying to capture that and share that with the FPC. I want to ensure with you how we're going to verify that there are Southside residents is you have to provide your name and your address and an email. Myself and the person on staff, Edith, who does our assessments, are the only two people who are going to see who respond, because we're locking that tool up to ensure that you have more confidence that your individual identity, you won't be singled out. So we're collecting, we have a goal of collecting at least 100 surveys by Thursday, 12 noon. And then we're going to take the surveys all as a group and respond to the FPC. So no one's identity is going to be shared. I think that's important, especially when you're dealing with law enforcement, that people don't feel that if they say something, they're going to get a repercussion from that. So we're going to take that information. We're going to verify this person says they live at this address. We have a massive Southside database that we can verify. And then we will combine all those answers and put them together for the Fire and Police Commission's review. So please participate. Please answer honestly. And then when you share your email, then we'll use that email, again, not sharing with other people, to make sure that you get the results of everybody's answers all together. So please do that. And then we want to make sure at the top of the form here that you all know that our thoughts and prayers are with those family members who have lost loved ones to police brutality, those residents who are dealing with the impacts of the coronavirus, and now just the nation and the community just being completely done with accepting racism and all kinds of the isms and police brutality. That's stressful. And then COVID, quarantine, having kids home, not being able to see family and friends. Some of you have been ill with it. Some of you have lost family. So I don't want to lose sight of that either. And we do have some police that we know are good cops. And I want to clarify this because people keep circling around it. The movement that's happening now is not against individual police officer actions. It is about the structure, the systems, the training, the culture and practices that allow for things to take place like we have been witnessing, including George Floyd, Joel Acevedo, Seville Smith, Dontre Hamilton, the stop and frisk, the illegal cavity searches. It's about a bigger thing than individual police. And so I just want to clarify that when people are angry and they're fed up, they're not just about one incident. They're saying the reason this incident even got noticed is because it was captured on camera. So how many, because we're all confident, how many more have happened that there's no evidence in? And then on top of it, when you see how smug his face is looking at that camera, it again brings up that we don't have confidence that when there is misconduct, it's going to be investigated correctly, it's going to be prosecuted, and there'll be results. So people are angry about really hundreds of years and recent history and a system, and on top of it, that there's a lack of confidence that it will be treated with the attention it gets and fairly, and that we know there's pressure on officers and the system to have a code of silence and block together. And so that's what people are kicking up about, in addition to the death, which is insurmountable, and the pain that goes along with that. People are responding to that. So I want to make that clear, because there's some debates about that. And I think that individuals think, oh, they're against every single police officer. And no, that's not what's happening. What's happening is much greater than that. When you get in an argument with somebody you love, and they think it's about, whatever. Some of you, it's the toilet seat. Some of you, it's who ate the last thing. Some of you, it's the holiday thing at the family. Some of you, it's the inheritance. It's never about a single argument. It's always about much bigger issues. And that's what's happening here, just to not lose sight of that. For those people who think, oh, when people are mad at the police, that X's out every good cop or every good thing that they did. No, it's just way bigger than that. Way bigger than that. Okay. With that being said, I want to share a disclaimer. The views and opinions shared here are not necessarily those of SOC. We're a certain type of organization. We can weigh in and do certain things, and in others we can't. And what we try to do is reflect the voices of those residents. The vast majority of our staff live on the near south side or south side. And so because we've expanded so big and there's so much to do, we have a few folks who don't live in our area but do live in a similar type area. And so anyway, with that, please know that we're trying to make a safe space for voices and to bring you information to debate. I'm very happy to have our guests now, because we need so much clarification and help understanding all the things that are happening. So I'm going to say some hellos, and then I'm going to bring on our guests. Hola, Marianne. Hola, Diana. Hola, Alejandra. Hola, Elsa. Buenas tardes. Hola, Chino, Mari, Cano, Lillian. Thank you, Elsa and Brianna Taylor. There's so many. It's so sad. There's so many. She's bringing up another young person of color who was murdered. And so there's so many. Thank you for being with us. With that, I'd like to bring on our special guest today. It is Karyn Rotker. And Karyn, hola, Karyn.
Buenas tardes. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being with us. Karyn is an attorney with the ACLU of Wisconsin, and so happy you can be here because there are so many things happening, Karyn. There have been so many tidal waves for such a long time. And so I don't think we even caught up in our minds and our souls with the ACLU law settlement when the next numerous layers of things happen. So we have about 20-25 minutes to discuss, give people the synopsis of the settlement. And then as part of that, to connect that to the Collaborative Community Committee, because SOC obviously is an appointed member and is on that executive committee member. So I'm going to leave you with the screen so people can see you. I'll be back. If you could give us a synopsis of the ACLU law settlement.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to do that and happy to be here. So people may remember that back in early 2017, we filed the lawsuit because at the time, the Milwaukee Police Department had a massive stop and frisk program, which was basically about stopping thousands and in some years tens of thousands of people in this community, primarily people of color, disproportionately young people as well, frankly, for no good reason. Pedestrians, bicyclists, people driving, sort of stopping and interrogating them, in a lot of cases frisking them before they had done anything wrong. And so we filed a lawsuit saying two things. One, that it was racially discriminatory, and one that under a different constitutional amendment, the Fourth Amendment, you have to have reasonable suspicion to stop and question someone, and that didn't exist. In 2018, the city agreed to settle the lawsuit. This was after Chief Flynn left and after Chief Morales was appointed. And it's a 50 some odd page settlement. So I'm not going to give all the details, but there are some big picture items. One is it requires collecting a lot of data, a lot of information about every stop. Why is that important? Because if you don't have the data and you don't know what's going on, you can't tell if it's right or wrong. And the data collection before that was terrible. So there's a lot of data collection. There is supposed to be certain kinds of training. There is supposed to be much more extensive supervision of officers and review by their supervisors. There are supposed to be periodic audits of the data by the Fire and Police Commission to make sure that that is in fact, that what the supervisors say is in fact correct. There is an outside consultant that is also supposed to be looking at the data as well as other issues to see if city officials are complying with this. And by city officials, I mean, there are officials in the city government, there's the Milwaukee Police Department and the Fire and Police Commission, and they all have a role to play. In addition to that, and I think more relevant for the conversation right now, there are certain provisions that deal with community engagement. What that's about is that it was really important to us and even more to the clients we represented, because we brought this case on behalf of 9 individuals, Black and Latino, Latina, Latinx persons in the community who had been wrongfully stopped and frisked. And our clients said to us, we also want to make sure there's community involvement. The police and the Fire and Police Commission, they need to listen to the community. And so there are a couple of provisions in the lawsuit that are supposed to require much better community involvement. We can talk a little more about whether they're being followed or not, because we do have some real concerns about that. One of them is that the Milwaukee Police Department every 6 months is supposed to release what's called a community policing status report. And the point of that report is so that the community knows what kind of community policing is occurring, because that's what people said they wanted. Police that were part of the community, that were responding to community needs, not acting like occupiers or coming in, as I said, and stopping thousands and tens of thousands of people just to interrogate them. Unfortunately, that agreement was signed in July of 2018. So we're now almost 2 years out. The reports were supposed to be issued every 6 months. And unfortunately, we have yet to see a community status policing report from the Milwaukee Police Department. So it's a real concern to us that we're not even hearing what's going on. Second, as I'm sure you know, we had the Milwaukee Collaborative Community Committee that existed before when the U.S. Department of Justice draft report on the police department came out in 2017 to address concerns, a lot of concerns related to stop and frisk and other issues that the federal government found were occurring. What was supposed to happen with our case and with our settlement is that was supposed to transition into a new version of the Milwaukee Collaborative Community Committee, CCC, in order to get feedback from residents in Milwaukee about the police department, not just feedback on stop and frisk, feedback on anything that people have concerns about. And that can include, and in this moment, it's really important to say, that can include police use of force. It can include police treatment of protesters, any of those issues. It is to be the bridge to the community to find out what the community is concerned about, what the largest concerns are, what priorities there are, bring that back to the Fire and Police Commission and the MPD, and be that kind of bridge. We also contemplated then that any reports, data collection, final information would also be shared back with the community. As far as we know, and at least as of last week, the CCC has yet to, the new CCC has yet to meet. Again, we're almost 2 years out of the settlement, and we're not hearing calls from the city officials, the MPD, the FPC, for that to happen. We're concerned that there seems to, in fact, have been some foot dragging about getting that in place. And what that means is that community voices are not being heard the way we think they need to be. We hear that perhaps the mayor wants to create some other kind of committee, but we already have a structure in place, or a structure that's supposed to be in place. And so we are hoping that that would have occurred already. And we think it's time, and long past time, for the city to implement that committee and get it functioning, because we need to make sure that the city is hearing what you care about in terms of the police department. So it's not 100% clear to me, Tammy, if you're coming back into the screen to ask me more questions, or if I should just keep talking individually, but I'm happy to keep talking about it a little bit.
I'm back. I wanted to give the community a better look at your face because it gets so small. And, to have you have their full attention. And so a couple of questions, yes.
Sure.
I think the biggest question I have, and we're going to ask all our viewers to post whatever questions you have for Karyn. Please do that. I'm going to read them. So please add anything that you need clarity on, or questions that you have. To some degree here, what I'm hearing from you, it's been 2 years and they haven't complied with a couple of things, at least. They're all critical things. They're not little things.
I don't think they're little things. I mean, without going too deep into the lawyer weeds, there are also not just some, there are also problems with data collection. We have concerns about some of the ways they've been trained in terms of what stops they're supposed to document. We think particularly their training this year, which I sat through, fell short. We have some questions about what's happening with supervising. The audits have not been fully implemented yet. We understand that piece, you need a little more training up to get to that. But there's a host of things that we have real concerns about. The community piece has really come to the fore, obviously, because of everything that's been happening in the last few weeks. And frankly, everything that's been happening since Joel Acevedo in the community. We feel like the community's voice needs to be heard. And if there was a time to get the CCC on board and functioning, it's a couple of months ago, not just now.
Yeah. And so here's the big question. If the city of Milwaukee and / it really means FPC, MPD, etc., are not in compliance, what are the consequences for them?
So there's a couple of stages. First of all, once a year, the consultant, which it's like what in some other cases is called a monitor. It's an outside third party from Boston. They do a report that looks at what the city has and hasn't done and hasn't complied with. They get a draft to us in the city in July. We have 30 days to comment, and then the final report will be out in September, just like a final report was out last September. So they can find non-compliance, which pressures the into compliance, because this agreement lasts 5 years, but it only ends after 5 years if the city's in compliance. So number one, if they're not in compliance, then the court order doesn't go away. Second of all, there are provisions that would allow the plaintiffs being the people who filed the lawsuit. You know, the ACLU, I want to be clear, we were their lawyers, but it was 9 courageous individuals who came forward who were the plaintiffs, can file in court to move to enforce and for different remedies from the court. The agreement originally said we couldn't do that. Like, we had to give the city 2 years to try to get up to speed before we moved for enforcement in court. But again, that 2 years comes up at the end of July. So I am not saying we're walking in on July 23rd into court, but after that point, you know, that is also something that can happen, is to try and get a court order ordering compliance and, you know, and or more extensive monitoring or different ways of trying to achieve that.
And so in July, we will see if where the sort of a dashboard, where they have movement and where they're not in compliance. It seems overall that it's a problem overall, and I can't imagine, just if we're guessing here, that this is going to be in any acceptable condition in July. And so then what I think I understand you saying is that's when the plaintiffs with their attorneys can decide to go back to court and tell the court to take some action. And then the court can further dictate some actions. Is there money settlements options as part of those actions? Because it seems like that's the only thing that really gets people's attention.
Yeah, it does sometimes. This is because this is a lot of leaps. So in July, the plaintiffs and their attorneys and the city get the draft. The one that's available to the public won't be out. Till September. So I don't want people leaping up in July and saying, why can't we see the report yet? Understanding that the case that we brought was not brought for money damages for people. No. We brought it as a class action to try to get orders to change. It would be, you know, there could be, for example, they could be required to pay the fees of the attorneys and costs for having to drag them into court. There are, and I'm not saying this would happen out of the box, there could be additional costs related to the monitoring that could end up being imposed on the city. It is unlikely in this particular case that there would be money damages to an individual. But there could be costs that are imposed on the city nonetheless. And let me say, you know, I'm a lawyer. I have been doing this for a very long time. We're not leaping up to say we want to drag the city into court. That's not our goal. Our goal, the goal of our clients, is to see the police department behave the way the community wants the police department to behave. Our goal is to see compliance. The other thing, though, that let me just throw out that I think is important, our lawsuit really dealt with stop and frisk. It did not deal with the issue of excessive police force. There is, I know that your audience has heard of Sterling Brown, the Milwaukee Bucks player who was dragged from his car and attacked by MPD officers. There are other cases out there looking at excessive force. So ours doesn't directly say you have to stop using chokeholds or issues like that. There are people out there looking at that. And of course, there's also advocacy, but it does not stop people, say, when the CCC gets active, from going to the CCC and saying, this is an absolutely critical concern for the community. We need to address it. We tried to keep the CCC as big and as broad as possible so that any concerns of the community could be brought to the CCC.
Great. And so let me see here if we have questions, Karyn, to say some hellos to people I haven't said hello to. Hola, Marina. Hola, Jeanette. Jeanette says, thanks for coming on, Karyn.
Thanks, Miranda.
Okay, so a couple of questions on accountability. I asked that question. Carlos, is the committee working to inform the protest leaders regarding the lack of compliance from the city with the CCC? Is the committee, I assume, Carlos, you're mentioning the Collaborative Community Committee, and we've been stalled. So we did our first phase work, submitted those findings to the FPC. They took action on the first order, which was to formally adapt the community policing policy, not just an informal practice by MPD. And I don't know where that stands now. And so we have been waiting for the appointees to be appointed by President of the Common Council, Chevy Johnson, and the mayor in order to move forward. The rest of the committee members are named by organization. And so that's what's stalling that. And then now some disruption to that with other groups being formed by or another group apparently being formed by the mayor. And I shared earlier, Karyn, that we had all this obstruction in our process, et cetera. And so if at the end, so as the evaluations are going, well, I suppose you'll have to examine it when it gets there, but if all of a sudden in December they produce a first review, what you call community policing status report, will they have to produce them individually for each 6 months, or they're going to be able to produce a one for all the time prior to that?
So, like whether they're going to have to go backward, I mean, we would ask that the first one include everything up until that time. Some of this is, I mean, the agreement is pretty specific. It doesn't reach that level of specificity.
Yeah. Okay.
But if they don't have one, at all, that's a huge problem. If they have one that only deals with a short time period, that's a problem from our perspective. I mean, some of this is going to get argued out, and it's got to be every 6 months. That is not even the CCC. And I want to be clear, the community status policing report is directly in the hands of the Milwaukee Police Department. And I'm saying that because you spoke earlier in the introduction about comments on the performance of the MPD or comments on the performance of the chief. Well, that is something that is under the MPD that they still haven't done. I want to note as a side note that this is not in the agreement, but there was a new MPD website created sometime last year. I think it's called MPD Guardians. And you go onto that website and it doesn't talk about community policing at all, which it suggests to me, I'm not getting inside anybody's minds, but if that was important, why is it being buried? I mean, why isn't it front and center as opposed to, that's why I said some of it seems an afterthought. And even though the CCC is in the hands of the mayor and the Common Council, again, we're not hearing from, say, the MPD or the FPC saying, hey, we need to get this up and running. This is really important. It's just, this is where I feel like these issues have been pushed aside. And if others are concerned about it, it may be appropriate to comment on that.
So 2 last questions here. I'm always going overtime.
That's okay.
My poor staff. One thing is, people on the ground need to know what has changed in stop and frisk since this settlement from their point of view. So if any of us get stopped by the police, what should we expect that interaction to have to, that is required of that interaction now because of the settlement?
First of all, they should only be stopping people in the first place if there's an indication you're really doing something wrong, right? Okay, drivers, there are a lot of traffic violations, and we know there's a lot of reckless driving, and so, people may get stopped for that. But particularly pedestrians, people just walking down the street doing no harm, not bothering anybody, they should not be being stopped in the first place. And people who are driving safely should not be being stopped in the first place.
So they have to have a reason to stop, suspected that you're doing something wrong.
That's exactly right.
Breaking a law. They have to stop you suspected breaking a law.
But it doesn't have to reach what we call probable cause, but they at least have to have something that they can articulate, something they can say, what were you doing? And there are certain things they can't use. They can't say, it's nighttime and you're walking on the street. Like hour of the day or night is not enough.
Okay.
person being in the wrong neighborhood. You know, we had heard, you don't look like you belong here. And we know who sometimes they think doesn't. That's not a good enough reason, okay? You know, you were peering in the window and knocking on the window of a house and, you know, trying the door and walking away. That's a different situation, but just you're walking down the street. No, that's not acceptable.
And
So,
when the police stop you, what are they required to do?
Well, first of all, they can only frisk you if they have a reasonable suspicion that you are armed and dangerous, okay? They can't just like put their hands on you and frisk you because they think you might have drugs, which a report that was just issued last week showed a number of frisks. They were claiming it was for drugs. Well, that's not constitutionally a reason to frisk. It's only if they think someone is armed and dangerous. So for starters, there's that. They should be keeping track of all of this. They can ask you some questions. You do not have to, drivers in particular have to give their name and their identification, but you don't have to answer questions. If you do not feel like answering questions, you can ask, am I free to go? And if for them to say you are not free to go, then it rises to them having to be able to articulate or spell out in detail higher levels of suspicion why they think you're doing something wrong. The other thing is, if people feel like they have been wrongly stopped, I don't know if it's operational yet, but if it isn't, it very soon will be. There's going to be an email to our office called Stop and Frisk at ACLU-WI.org. And as soon as that's live, I'll send it to you, Tammy, and you can share. People who feel like they were wrongly stopped, we want to know, because we're encouraging people to file complaints with the Fire and Police Commission, but we want to follow those. This is not, we can't take people's individual criminal cases. If you actually get charged, you need to call the public defender's office. Mm-hmm. But if you feel like you were stopped and they were accusing you of, I don't know, having drugs, and then they let you walk away and you feel like you were being profiled, we want to hear about it. We can give you information on how to file a complaint, but we're also tracking some of these complaints because they were also supposed to reform the complaint process. And one of the only ways to tell if it's really working and if they're truthfully investigating is to know who's filing complaints. And yeah, and not necessarily with a lawyer, because sometimes if they file with us, with a lawyer, it'll be treated differently than if a community person
files. That's a good point.
But you can let us know. And so again, we want to follow that. That's an opportunity for people. They claim that the number of stops, particularly of pedestrians, has gone way down. If you feel like you've been stopped and that it, you know, there wasn't a good reason given, again, these are the kind of stop and frisk questions we want, because there's data, which is numbers, but the original case was brought because people in the community came and talked to us.
Got you. We're going to slip in one last question because we're over time. Elsa says, sorry. That's okay. Elsa says, can we ask the officer, why did you stop me? Should they be required to answer?
You definitely can ask, why did you stop me? I think it's a slightly gray area if they should be required to answer, but I think they should answer. I don't think it's spelled out that explicitly in the policy, but I can go back and double check that. But I definitely think you should ask. And again, we'd be interested in hearing what they have to say. The other thing that's happened, let me just throw out a couple of times, is like two people will be walking together and they'll stop one and let the other one go. And a lot of times they're either racial or gender differences in who gets treated different ways. So we'd be, you know, I'm walking down the street with my Black friend and they're like, oh, you go on, lady, and hold the other person, for example.
Okay. One last quick question. Do police officers have to display their identity, their name and badge?
They should be doing that, yes. And we have concerns.
We had that question the other day. Karyn, we're going to have you back on because people want more information. Thank you so much for being on. We appreciate you. And if folks want to get in contact, we put your contact information from the ACLU up. Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you, you too, and the community.
All right, folks, I've taken up more time because there's so much to talk about. So we're going to try to move quickly. I'm going to invite on our coronavirus coordinator and Marlene Zaran, and she's going to catch us up with that area of interest and concern.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to give you an update right now about what's been going on with COVID-19. Currently, the data and the statistics show that we're still in phase 2 phase 3 as compared to last week's numbers. So that hasn't changed. We're still in yellow. So essentially what being in phase 3 means is businesses can now open at 50% capacity of occupancy with a maximum of 250 people. Childcare centers can operate at 50% capacity. Public and private events are allowed at 25 capacity with a maximum of 250 people. Bars and restaurants can open for indoor service at 25% capacity. Indoor dining will be allowed at 25 capacity. Outdoor dining will be allowed with precautions and social distancing. Salons and barbershops will continue to operate with the current restrictions, which is at 25% capacity. You're currently allowed to go. You're currently allowed to go to parks and beaches, but remember there are restrictions with social distancing. For beaches, you have to continue walking on beaches. You should not be sitting on the shore for too long, or you can sit and not be around a large group of people. So just remember those rules and you should be fine. So next I'm going to talk about, I have a individual that I interviewed yesterday. His name is Dr. Yaffa. He's a local doctor in Milwaukee, and he's going to give us a quick update and information of youth and how obesity has had an impact on youth's health in regards to COVID-19.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So my first question for you is, what preconditions do young individuals with COVID-19 present?
So right now, honestly, it's only been a few months that we've had COVID, right? So the only thing that we can do is speculate. So far, the common comorbidities that we see among many young Americans is having obesity, like you mentioned, as well as having underlying hypertension that they may have not known about, as well as diabetes. And this just falls in the whole spectrum of, metabolic syndrome, which is all related to obesity and just our lifestyle of, not eating the best that we could. And then the things that come associated with obesity, such as hypertension and diabetes.
Oh.
And then I guess if you look at it, in a broader aspect, older patients, first of all, their age would be the most risk factor. And then just other comorbidities, if they're immunosuppressed, if they're on chemotherapy, if they're on, say, medications that suppress their immune system, as well as just being a healthy elderly person who just happens to catch COVID, unfortunately. But, it's just a very random disease. It's a very random virus, and there's not one thing that we can pinpoint to.
Okay. Well, thank you for that information. How does COVID-19 affect someone with obesity? Can you talk more about that?
So obesity on its own, I feel like it's not talked about as much as we should, but it is its own disease where it causes this underlying inflammatory state. The fat cells, the adipocytes, they release these inflammatory enzymes that sort of blunt the immune system. So, diabetes was theorized to be secondary to inflammatory responses from the fat cells. So just imagine fat cells releasing these inflammatory markers attacking the pancreas, causing diabetes, right? As well as other things, having problems breathing, where we have something similar to a COPD or asthma, but not necessarily asthma or COPD. It's called, hypoventilatory syndrome, secondary to obesity. And just with those combined with COVID, it just throws you over the edge and, causes you to be admitted to the ICU and eventually intubated and subsequently, staying in the ICU for longer than you should be. Unfortunately, I've seen it in real life where I've seen young patients that are only, obese with a BMI of like 30 or not even 30, and they would be in the ICU intubated because of that.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. I felt it was really important for young people today to know, especially with what's going on. Can you talk? We had a question earlier this week from a resident on the south side. They're interested in knowing, how does tear gas affect the body?
So tear gas itself, it's a chemical irritant that affects your mucosal membranes. So for example, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, it'll just cause irritation. It's transient, but, I guess earlier you mentioned someone with COVID being tear gassed. First of all, someone with COVID should not be outside of their house, right? Because that's our societal responsibility of being quarantined, staying in our own room. I know that's a luxury for a lot of people, but tear gas on its own will cause chemical irritation, that acute shortness of breath, dyspnea, and just the panic. I've never been tear gassed, thank God, but I can't tell you how it feels exactly, but I can just tell you scientifically.
So how does it affect someone who does have asthma?
So someone with asthma is already prone to having, respiratory problems. Unfortunately, there was this story about a young college graduate that has asthma and was recently tear gassed, and unfortunately he died because of being tear gassed. That was very unfortunate. Someone with a comorbidity like COPD, emphysema, asthma, being tear gassed is just not good news at all. And, that will just throw them off the edge, throw them into asthmaticus, statisticus, or an asthma attack.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did not know all that information. Well, thank you, Dr. Yaffa, for sharing all of that with me today and sharing it with the south side of Milwaukee.
Of course, anytime. Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, for finding Dr. Yapa and bringing us that update on how C19 impacts youth, in particular, who are obese, and how tear gas impacts folks, especially those who have any respiratory problems. Now we're going to quickly bring on our Civic Engagement Manager, Gabe Charles, to give us a civic and census update.
Hi everybody, I hope you had a good and safe weekend. I know this week we are packed full of really great guests to talk about what's been going on in Milwaukee and nationwide. And I just also want to keep you all posted about what's happening locally with different committee and council meetings, because it is a packed full week of different meetings as well. So today at 1:30, there was a Judiciary and Legislation Committee meeting. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the Zoning, Neighborhoods, and Development Committee will be meeting. Also tomorrow at 5:30, the Board of Health will meet. And again, these are all virtual. You can find the links at milwaukee.legistrar.com or watch them live at milwaukee.com milwaukee.gov/city channel. Moving on to Wednesday at 9 a.m., the Finance and Personnel Committee will be meeting. And then Thursday at 4:30 p.m., the Fire and Police Commission will be meeting. So this is going to be a really important one to tune into, especially with all of the unrest that's been happening in Milwaukee and the different incidents that are being investigated that happened at different peaceful protests that were happening around the city. And we're looking into different incidents that Milwaukee Police Department may have used excessive force. And this will be an especially interesting meeting because Tom Barrett himself has come out against the use of rubber bullets unless and tear gas as well, unless very, very dire circumstances. So this will be an interesting meeting to attend. And we, of course, will be letting you all know big updates that happen, important updates that happen. So stay tuned, and I hope that all of you enjoy the guests that we have this week that will talk even more in depth about what's been going on. And as usual, I also want to take some time to devote to the census. The census is so very important, and we can't overlook it. Even with everything that's going on, Milwaukee is still has a number of neighborhoods that are considered hard to count neighborhoods that are under 50% completion so far. So we really need to make sure we're encouraging our friends and our neighbors and our families to be filling out the census, because this will affect us for the next 10 years, remember. So I want to leave you all with a video that explains a little bit about the census. Again, it is super important. It will affect public service funding and all types of funding for the next 10 years and our political representation locally for the next 10 years. So fill that out. And as always, you can reach out to SOC with any questions or concerns. And I will talk to you all soon.
Every student is full of possibilities, just like every community, which is why the 2020 census wants to make sure we are all counted. Because an accurate census count can help inform funding for things like after-school programs and education for the next 10 years. Let's stand together. Let's make it possible.
Shape your future. Start here. Learn more at 2020census.gov.
Thank you, Gabe. It's so good to see that video of graduates. It reminds us of our current promotion. So I'm going to ask Marisol, our communications manager, to update us on our current gift card promotion.
Submit a census-related graduation photo to enter to win a $50 gift card and to be featured in our Class of 2020 slideshow next Friday, June 12th. Be as creative as you'd like, as long as it's related to the census in some way. Submit your 2020 census graduation photos to soc@socmilwaukee.org, SOC@socmilwaukee.org. Get those photos in by next Wednesday, June 10th. Thank you and congratulations to all of our neighborhood graduates.
Thank you, Marisol. Please do participate in that, folks. You know, our graduates are not getting their due. All that hard work is not getting all the usual attention that they deserve for those accomplishments. And this is one way, yet again, to lift up that and enter into our drawing to get a gift card. I want to remind you that if in any way this program has been valuable to you, please show your appreciation by filling out our daily survey. It only takes a couple of minutes. So please, 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 it's just a few questions. You can get that on our link here. Andreas put it on the comments. And we need that for our funders. And we need it to make sure that we're meeting your needs. As you can see, we're responding constantly to what you say you need here and bringing folks on to talk to you about that. So please cooperate. What I'd like to do now is remind you of what's happening with the rest of the week. You don't want to miss tomorrow. Dr. Baez is with us. Dr. Tony Bias. He is our elected school board director, and greater than that, he is a legacy civil rights leader nationally and here locally. Really spearheaded the bilingual education movement. Latino civil rights was a key partner in that movement here and continues to be, and just is very extremely knowledgeable of the civil rights movement, and he's going to be with us tomorrow. And then we still have some scheduling to do, but we have commitments from Dr. Rob Smith to be with us again, professor at Marquette University and the director of their Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, and the Office of Violence Prevention, and many others. We want to again share that our solidarity with protesters as SOC continues to spend its energy here. Our thoughts and prayers are with you who are dealing with all the impacts of COVID and long-term racism, police brutality. And remind you that tonight, our survey on how Chief Morales is doing will be out, and we want you to fill it out. Now, we're really committed to sharing our near South Side voice. So no matter where you fall on the spectrum, you super support him, you're super critical of him, or anything in between, this is the time to speak up. And we're doing it so that you can give us the input and you don't have to feel unsafe about sharing your opinion, because we're going to collect it as a whole. Our goal is to get at least 100 surveys in by Thursday this noon, and then we're sharing that information from the FPC. Your voice is not going to be alone, but it helps us be able to tell the story and helps us keep you safe. So you really want to participate in that. Look for that. It's going to be out this evening. With that, please do our survey. Please recognize a graduate with our promo. And then we want to thank you for being with us. And we want to thank the partners, our funding partners, for making this happen. And so we'll leave you with that. Please be safe. And we'll see you back tomorrow at 3 o'clock with SOC.
Hello, SOC viewers. I am Lynn from Flannel. We would like to thank everyone for supporting our 3 o'clock with SOC live show and for completing our SOC survey. In addition to thanking our residents for tuning in and sharing our show, we would also like to thank the following sponsors:
Wisconsin Voices, Community Development Block Grants, Neo Philanthropy State Infrastructure Fund, Movement Voter Project, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, Zilber Foundation, City of Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention, the Tides Foundation, City of Milwaukee Promise Zones, and all the faithful individuals who support SOC through their personal donations. Thank you.